Salvage work paid in scraps, and Darrow had been chewing on scraps for 9 years. His freighter was old, his fuel was rationed, and his last contract had ended with a busted hand and half the pay promised. So when the listing came in for a derelict transport drifting near a collapsed wormhole, he took it without reading the warnings twice. 3 other crews had already refused the job. That was usually a good sign for him. Fewer hands meant a bigger cut if anything inside was worth pulling. The dead ship sat tilted in the dark, its hull split along one flank like a cracked rib. Darrow tethered his freighter to its side and crossed over with a torch strapped to his shoulder. Inside, frost coated every wall. Bodies of the original crew were long gone, swept out into space when the hull tore. He moved through corridors filled with floating tools and shredded cargo netting, scanning for anything still sealed, still valuable. He found the pod in the deepest hold. It was alien work, no question. The metal was black and ridged, shaped like a long, curved shell, almost as tall as he was. Frost clung to its surface in patterns that looked carved rather than grown. He wiped the panel with his glove and saw faint pulses of heat through the cracked viewport. Whatever was inside, it was still warm. That alone made no sense after years adrift. He pried the seal open with his cutting tool. 6 eggs sat inside. Each one was the size of his torso, shelled in dark stone, veined with thin lines that glowed when his torch passed over them. He had seen pictures of eggs like these in cheap news feeds and bounty posters. Vharn, dragon kind, the species every captain in the outer trade lanes avoided talking about. The species that grew into mountain-sized things with teeth longer than a man. The ship's data core still had a flicker of power. Darrow pulled the records and read them in the cold dark of the hold. The clutch had been left here on purpose. The Vharn Council itself had marked the eggs unfit. A long string of words he could not translate sat beside the order, but one phrase came through clear in galactic trade tongue. Cursed, unworthy, to be left to the stars. He sat down on the edge of the broken pod and stared at the eggs for a long time. The cold worked its way through his suit. He thought of his ration packets, his thin bank account, the bounty hunters who would shoot first if they heard about this find. He thought of how easy it would be to seal the pod again and leave. One of the eggs shifted. A small sound came from inside it. Not a crack, not yet. Just a faint tapping like a knuckle on a window. Darrow let out a slow breath that fogged inside his helmet. He had no business doing what he was about to do. He had no place to put 6 baby anything, much less 6 baby creatures the galaxy feared. His ship had no nursery, no proper heating cells, no protein mixers for alien young. He was not a father. He was barely a man who fed himself on time. He loaded the eggs anyway. One at a time, careful as glass, he carried them across the tether line to his freighter. Each one was heavier than it looked. By the 6th trip his arms were burning and his back was wet with sweat inside the cold suit. He stacked them in the warmest part of the cargo bay, near the engine wall, and wrapped them in every spare blanket and tarp he had. Then he sat down on a crate across from them and just looked. "You should not be here," he said out loud. His voice sounded too small in the empty bay. "None of you should be here." The eggs did not answer. The faint glowing veins on their shells pulsed slow, like sleeping breath. He scrubbed his face with his palms. Then he stood up, walked to the cockpit, and set a course for the only place he could think of where no one would come looking. An old mining station in a dead asteroid field, abandoned for 30 years, where he sometimes hid between jobs. The jump would take 3 weeks at his ship's speed. For 2 days he barely slept. He kept walking back to the cargo bay to check the heat, to listen for that tapping sound, to count the eggs again in case he had imagined one. He read every page of the stolen Vharn medical files on his cracked tablet. The language was hard, half of it untranslated, but he picked out what he could. Mineral paste, synth protein with iron threads, heat above 40 degrees. He scribbled notes on the back of an old shipping form. On the 3rd day he caught himself talking to the eggs, telling them about the route, about the dead station with its dusty halls and broken windows, about how he used to dream when he was a boy on a desert moon of finding something in space that mattered. He laughed at himself after, alone in the bay, his voice cracking from disuse. The news feed in the cockpit kept running in the background. He half listened. Halfway through the second week, the feed lit up with red banners. 3 governments had logged an unaccounted Vharn clutch missing from sanctioned disposal coordinates. Bounties were posted for any vessel seen carrying alien eggs of draconic origin, sums he had never seen in his life. Darrow looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he reached forward and shut it off. In the cargo bay behind him, something tapped. This time he was sure. The first shell broke open in the middle of the night, and Darrow nearly fell out of his bunk trying to reach the cargo bay in time. He skidded into the room barefoot, breathing hard, and stopped at the door. The smallest egg, the one in the back corner, had cracked along its top. A wet snout was pushing through the gap. He could see scales the color of wet stone, and a single eye with 3 black pupils, blinking up at him through the broken shell. Darrow lowered himself to the floor slowly so he would not look big. He had read that part in the files. New Vharn Young saw the first standing creature as a threat. The little one watched him from inside the broken egg, its tiny chest rising and falling fast. Darrow held out one open hand. "Take your time," he said softly. For nearly an hour the hatchling did not move beyond the shell. Then, in one clumsy push, it tumbled out onto the bay floor in a heap of wet limbs and folded wings. One of its wings was bent at a strange angle, smaller than the other, twisted near the base. It tried to stand and fell, tried again and fell again. Darrow reached forward without thinking and steadied it with one palm against its small ribs. The hatchling froze. Then slowly, it leaned into his hand and made a sound somewhere between a chirp and a purr. "Bean," he said quietly. He did not know why that name came to him. It just did. By morning 2 more eggs had cracked. By the end of the next day, all 6 hatchlings were out. They sat in a wobbly pile near the engine wall, climbing over each other for warmth, opening their mouths wide whenever Darrow came close. He named them as he learned to tell them apart. The biggest one with broad shoulders and a calm face he called Sable. The fast one who would not sit still he called Pip. The dark one with red along his spine was Rook. The one who slept the most was Myra. The clever one who watched everything before doing anything was Tully. And Bean, the smallest, with her crooked wing and her habit of climbing into Darrow's lap whenever he sat down. Feeding them was a disaster for the first week. The synth protein burned in his old food maker. The mineral paste came out lumpy. He scalded his hand twice on the heating coil and learned, the hard way, that frightened hatchlings breathed small bursts of fire. Pip set his sleeve on fire on day 3. Rook melted the corner of a plastic crate on day 5. Darrow patted out the flames, swore loudly, and went back to mixing the paste with one hand wrapped in a wet rag. He started keeping a notebook. Real paper, the kind he had not used in years. He wrote what worked and what did not. Iron threads in the protein made their scales darken in a good way. Too much mineral paste made them sleepy. They liked warm water in a flat dish, not cold from the tap. Bean refused to eat unless Darrow sat near her. Pip would eat anything if it was thrown in the air. The mining station came into view 2 weeks later, a small gray lump against the dust of the asteroid field. Darrow docked his freighter at the lower bay and spent 3 days clearing one of the old crew rooms. He pulled out broken bunks, swept 30 years of dust, patched the heating vents with parts from his ship. When it was warm enough, he carried the hatchlings in one by one inside a padded crate, all 6 of them piled together, watching him with bright triple-pupiled eyes. They grew faster than he expected. By the end of the first month, Bean was the size of a small cat. Sable was already as big as a medium dog and twice as heavy. They began to follow him through the station, a clumsy line of scaled bodies and dragging tails, tripping over each other, learning the layout of the halls. Darrow started talking to them as he worked. He told them what each tool was for. He told them which hallway was safe and which had a broken floor. He told them stories his mother had told him on the desert moon, stories about brave, foolish people who did the right thing for no good reason. One night he sat on the floor of the main room with all 6 of them piled around him. Pip was chewing on his boot. Sable was using his thigh as a pillow. Rook had wrapped his tail around Darrow's wrist like a small living rope. Myra was asleep across his other leg. Tully sat upright a short distance away, watching the door as if guarding it. Bean was curled against his chest, her small heart beating fast against his ribs. Darrow looked down at them and felt something break open inside him that he did not have a name for. "You are not cursed," he said. His voice was rough. "Whoever told the galaxy you were cursed was a liar." Bean opened one sleepy eye and made a soft sound against his shirt. The news feed in the next room was still running on low volume. The bounty had been raised again. New governments had joined the search. A trade officer with a sharp voice was saying that any ship found carrying the missing clutch should be destroyed on sight. No questions, no trial. Darrow reached over without disturbing the dragons and turned the feed off. He did not move from the floor for the rest of the night. The 6 little dragons slept on him, breathing slow, warm against the cold metal of a station the galaxy had forgotten. Fuel ran low 4 months in, and that was the only reason Darrow left the station at all. He took the freighter alone, leaving the dragons behind for the first time since they had hatched. Sable was old enough now to keep order. Pip was the size of a large hound. Bean had cried at the door when he sealed it, and that cry stayed with him through the whole jump out to the trade buoy. He told himself it would be a quick run, in and out, 3 drums of fuel, 2 crates of mineral paste, no chatting with anyone. He had cash hidden in a wall panel from old salvage work. Enough for this. Maybe enough for one more run after. The buoy station was busy. Darrow kept his hood up and his shoulders low. He paid in coin, not card, and turned down the offer of a hot meal. He was loading the last drum onto his cargo lift when a long shadow fell across the deck. The patrol cruiser had not been there 10 minutes ago. It was small, fast, painted in the dull green of the Trade Coalition. 3 officers walked down its ramp toward Darrow's freighter. They were Krell, tall, beaked creatures with feathered crests and 4 long fingers on each hand. The lead officer carried a scanner. The other 2 carried sidearms already drawn. "Cargo inspection," the lead officer said. His translator clicked between every word. "Step away from the ship." Darrow felt the back of his neck go cold. He stepped aside. He had cleaned the bay before leaving. He had wiped every scale, every claw mark. The hatchlings were not on board, but the scanner in the officer's hand was the new kind. The kind that read heat signatures from inside hidden compartments. He had no hidden compartments holding dragons today. He had something worse. He had a small bag tucked under the engine wall with 6 chewed-up toys, 6 feeding dishes, and a notebook full of his careful handwriting about how to raise them. The officers boarded. Darrow stood on the deck and watched. He counted breaths to stay calm. The lead Krell came out of the freighter 4 minutes later holding the notebook in one gloved hand. His beak clicked twice. The other officers raised their weapons. "You have been harboring abandoned spawn," the lead officer said. His voice was flat. "The bounty is the same dead or alive. Step away from your ship, hands where I can see them." Darrow raised his hands slowly. He thought about Bean crying at the door. He thought about Sable trying to be brave. He thought about the long jump back to the station and how easy it would be for these 3 to follow his fuel signature there and finish the work without him. "I do not have them with me," he said. "Search the ship again. They are not here." "Where are they?" Darrow said nothing. The lead Krell stepped closer. His beak was close enough that Darrow could see the small notches along its edge. "You will tell us, or we will pull this rust bucket apart strut by strut until your fuel logs tell us themselves." Darrow looked at him for a long moment. Then he lowered his hand slowly. "Take me in," he said. "Take the ship. I will not say where they are." The Krell laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. You think you are protecting them, you are protecting nothing. They will grow into monsters and eat the first soft thing that walks past their nest. We are doing the galaxy a favor. They are children. They are weapons. They are children. The Krell raised his sidearm. He aimed it at Darrow's chest, casually, like he had done this many times before. That was when the dock alarm sounded. 3 small docking lights flashed red along the far edge of the bay. A freighter signal had broken regulation. Heat signatures inside the docking field. 6 of them, each one larger than a man. Darrow's stomach dropped. The doors at the end of the bay opened. 6 shapes walked out in a loose line, not children anymore, not the small wobbling things from 4 months ago. Sable led them, taller than Darrow now, scales dark as wet stone, eyes set forward and calm. Pip walked at his shoulder with red lining her spine. Rook, Myra, Tully, and Bean came behind. Bean was still the smallest. Her crooked wing dragged a little when she walked. She walked anyway. They had stolen a short-range shuttle from the mining station. They had followed the freighter's fuel trail. They had crossed open space alone for the first time in their lives, because their father had not come home on time and the warning feeds had been screaming about Krell patrols all morning. The lead Krell froze with his weapon still raised at Darrow's chest. The dragons did not attack. They did not roar. They moved into a slow half-circle around Darrow and the 3 officers, and they began to growl in low harmony, all 6 voices layered into one deep sound that made the metal floor shiver underfoot. The 2 armed Krell stepped back, their weapons lowered without anyone telling them to. The lead officer's beak opened and closed. No sound came out. Darrow reached out and pressed his palm gently to Sable's flank. The dragon's growl softened, just for him. "Go," Darrow said to the Krell. His voice was steady now. "Get back on your ship. Tell your captain what you saw." The lead Krell stared at him for a long beat. Then he and his officers walked backwards to their cruiser without turning around once. The cruiser left the buoy at full burn. Darrow sat down hard on a fuel drum. Bean limped over and pressed her head against his knee. Word, he knew, would travel fast now. 6 months after the buoy incident, the sky over the mining station turned black at noon. Darrow was teaching Tully to read when it happened. They were sitting in what used to be the station mess hall, now full of cushions and scratched-up reading tablets. Tully had picked up the human alphabet faster than any of the others. He liked old paper books best. Darrow had been pointing at a word in a children's story when the lights in the room dimmed. A shadow had fallen across the station. He stood up slowly. Tully stood with him. From the wide window at the end of the hall, they could see it. A Vharn warship had come out of jump directly above the asteroid field, so big it blotted out the distant sun. The hull was the color of dried blood. Symbols Darrow could not read curved along its side. He had been waiting for this day for months. He had just not expected it to come so quietly. "Inside," he told Tully. "Get the others lower hall." Tully ran. Darrow walked to the main airlock alone, his hands empty except for an old tool wrench he picked up on the way. It was a stupid thing to carry. He carried it anyway because his hands shook without something in them. The Vharn shuttle landed in the outer dock with a noise like grinding stone. Darrow stood at the airlock door as it opened. The envoy who stepped out was the largest living thing he had ever seen up close. She was at least 4 times his height, walking on 2 heavy legs, her scaled body covered in robes the color of deep water. Her face was long and narrow, her eyes a pale yellow with 3 pupils each, set high above a mouth lined with teeth he did not want to look at directly. 2 great wings were folded against her back. She did not need a translator. She spoke trade tongue in a low, careful voice that made Darrow's chest vibrate. "You are the human." "I am. My name is Vasa. I am of the council. I have come for the clutch." "They are not a clutch anymore," Darrow said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "They are mine." She tilted her huge head at him. The motion was slow, considering, like a mountain choosing whether to fall. You misunderstand. They are not yours to keep. They were never yours to take. The council marked them at the moment of laying. Their lives were closed before they were opened. You have only delayed the closing. Then take it back to your council and tell them the closing did not work. Vasa's eyes narrowed. For a long moment she did not speak. The silence pressed down on the airlock like another shadow. Then she stepped forward. One slow step, the metal under her foot groaned. Step aside, human. I do not wish to harm the small one who fed them, but I will. Darrow did not step aside. He raised the tool wrench. He knew how foolish it looked. He knew how foolish he looked, standing there in his old work clothes with his thin shoulders and his hand wrapped around a piece of bent metal, facing down a creature who could have crushed him by leaning. He raised it anyway. You walk through me, he said quietly, or you walk away. Vasa looked at him with something that was not quite anger. Curiosity, maybe. The look a person gives an insect doing something an insect should not be able to do. She took another step. Behind Darrow, the inner airlock door slid open. He did not turn. He did not have to. He heard them move. The soft, heavy tread of 6 dragons walking up behind him, larger than they had any right to be in only 10 months but not yet full grown. Sable came up on his right side, Pip on his left. Rook and Myra stepped past him to fan out wider. Tully came to stand directly behind him. Bean, smaller than her brothers and sisters, her crooked wings still uneven, walked up to the front and stood between Darrow's legs like she had when she was small. They did not roar at Vasa. They positioned themselves in front of Darrow, all 6 of them between the human and the Viharn elder. They bared their teeth and lowered their heads. Their growls layered together like deep music. Their wings flared open, half spread, ready. Vasa stopped moving. She did not breathe for a long time. Darrow could see her huge chest holding still under the dark robes. Her yellow eyes moved from one young dragon to another, and then to him, and then back to the dragons. They are guarding you, she said. Her voice was different now. Smaller somehow, even though she had not changed in size. They are my family. That is not possible. Look at them, Darrow said. Look at them and tell me again it is not possible. Vasa looked. She looked for a long time. Then slowly she lowered her great head, not in surrender, in thought. I have read the old writings, she said quietly. I have read every prophecy of this clutch. None of them, none foretold this. Then your writings miss something. Perhaps, her yellow eyes met his. Or perhaps they did not. I must return to the council. There are old words I must read again, words I once thought were superstition. She turned without another threat. Her shuttle door opened behind her. Before she stepped inside, she looked back at Darrow one more time. You will be summoned, she said. Soon, be ready, small human. The galaxy is about to look at you. The shuttle rose. The warship pulled away from the asteroid field. Darrow sank to his knees on the airlock floor. 6 dragons surrounded him at once. The summons came 3 weeks later, sealed in a black stone tablet that arrived by Viharn courier and could not be opened by any tool Darrow owned. A young Viharn messenger had to break the seal himself, kneeling on the docking floor of the mining station with great care. The words inside were carved in 2 languages. The human translation said only this: the council requests the presence of the human keeper and his clutch on the Viharn homeworld within 10 days. Failure to appear will be treated as refusal to be heard. Refusal to be heard will be treated as guilt. Darrow read it twice, then handed it to Sable, who read it once and went very still. The Viharn homeworld was a planet Darrow had never thought he would see. Pictures of it in the trade feeds showed jagged red mountains and skis the color of ash. The real thing was bigger and colder and more silent than any picture. The council's transport carried Darrow and his 6 dragons down through clouds the color of smoke, into a city carved out of the mountain itself, its great stone halls open to the sky. They were brought to the council chamber the next morning. The chamber was a circular pit at the heart of the city, large enough to hold a small starship, with 12 high seats carved into the stone walls. 12 Viharn elders sat in those seats. Each of them was larger than Vasa. Each of them watched in silence as Darrow walked to the center of the floor. His 6 dragons were not allowed to follow him there. They were held behind a tall blue force field at the edge of the chamber, close enough to see him, too far to reach him. Sable pushed against the force field with his shoulder when Darrow stepped away. The field hissed and held. "Stay calm," Darrow called back to them. His voice echoed strangely in the great pit. "I will be fine." He was not sure if he meant it. The eldest of the council spoke first. He was old enough that his scales had gone pale gray, and his voice came out like dry leaves moving across stone. "You have raised a clutch that was not yours. You have spoken to them as kin. You have stood between them and our envoy with a weapon in your hand. These acts are not crimes among your people. Among ours, they are an old kind of theft." "Then judge me for theft," Darrow said. He kept his hands at his sides. He kept his voice low. "But do not judge them. They were left to die in a frozen pod. They did not steal anything. They were given." A second elder leaned forward. "Given by our hand, yes, to the dark where they belonged. You interrupted the giving. They were children. They were marked." "By what?" The chamber rustled. The elders looked at each other. None of them answered him directly. Then the eldest spoke again, slower this time. "The bond you claim to have with them is unprecedented. We do not believe it. We will test it." He raised one long claw and pointed. A side door opened at the lower edge of the chamber. A Viharn warrior stepped through. He was younger than Vasa, leaner, with battle markings burned into his chest scales. He wore no weapons, but he did not need any. He was a weapon. "He will approach you," the eldest said. "He will not be stopped by us. If the bond is true, the clutch will not allow him to harm you. If the bond is false, you will die here today, and the clutch will be returned to lawful disposal." Darrow's heart hammered against his ribs. The warrior began to walk toward him across the chamber floor. Darrow did not move. He did not run. He looked past the warrior through the chamber to the force field where his 6 dragons stood pressed against the glowing blue wall. Bean was at the front. Her eyes were locked on him. Her crooked wing was half raised. He nodded at her once, a small nod just for her. The warrior was 3 steps away. The force field cracked. It cracked from the inside, not from one push but from 6 layered together, all 6 dragons hitting the field at the same instant with their full weight. The crack ran up the field like lightning and burst. Blue sparks rained down. The force field collapsed. The dragons crossed the chamber floor in seconds. They did not attack the warrior. They did not roar at him. They came to a stop in front of Darrow, all 6 of them, and arranged themselves into a wall of scaled bodies between the human and the approaching Viharn. Sable stood directly before Darrow. Pip and Rook flanked him, Myra and Tully behind. Bean stepped forward alone in front of them all, smaller than any of them, her crooked wing fully spread. She faced the warrior, and she did not move. The warrior stopped walking. The chamber went so quiet Darrow could hear his own breathing. Vasa, who had been seated among the council in silence until now, stood up from her high seat. "Read the old words again," she said to the others. Her voice carried across the chamber. "Read them carefully this time. The clutch was not cursed. The prophecy did not say cursed." The eldest turned to her slowly. "Then what did it say?" "It said the clutch would only live if claimed by a heart that did not fear them." Vasa's yellow eyes burned. "We did not abandon them because they were unworthy. We abandoned them because no Viharn dared keep what the prophecy said would not be ours." A long silence fell. Darrow placed one hand gently on Sable's flank. The council, for the first time in 900 years, did not know what to say. The argument inside the council chamber lasted 4 days, and during those 4 days, Darrow slept on the floor of a stone guest hall with 6 dragons piled around him, because none of them would leave his side. The hall they had been given was the size of a small hangar. The ceiling was so high that Sable could fly small circles inside it if he wanted to. None of them wanted to. They stayed close to Darrow. They ate from the same bowls. They drank from the same trough. When Viharn's servants came to leave food at the door, the dragons watched them until they left, then carried the trays to Darrow themselves before they ate. The council was split. Vasa told him this each evening when she came to visit. Half of the elders wanted the dragons returned to Viharn custody by old law, raised in the proper Viharn way, kept under the council's eye for the rest of their lives. The other half, the half Vasa was now leading, argued that the prophecy was clear and could not be undone. The bond was sacred. To break it would be to break the dragons themselves. "And what do they want?" Vasa asked him on the third night, sitting on the stone floor across from him, her huge body folded down to be more or less at his level. "They want what they have always wanted," Darrow said, "to stay together." Vasa was quiet. Then she said, "The council has not asked them. The council has not in 900 years asked a clutch what it wanted. Maybe they should." She left without answering. The next morning she came back with a request from the council. The dragons would be allowed to speak. Darrow had not known until that moment that the council would allow it. He had also not known until that moment that the dragons could. They walked into the chamber together, all 7 of them. Darrow in the middle, his 6 dragons around him in a loose ring. The force field stayed down this time. The warrior was not present. The eldest of the council looked down at them from his high seat. "The clutch may speak," he said, "if the clutch can speak." Pip stepped forward first. She lifted her head and opened her mouth and spoke, in the deep, clean Viharn tongue, words Darrow could not understand, but words that made every elder in the chamber sit up straighter. She told them about the cold pod, about the dark, about the first warmth she had ever known being a human's hand pressing against her shell. Sable went next, then Rook, then Myra, then Tully. Each of them spoke. Each of them in the old tongue, careful and slow, words they had been learning in secret from books Darrow had not known were on the station, words they had been practicing for this day from the moment the summons arrived. Bean was last. She was the smallest. Her crooked wing was uneven against her side. She walked alone to the center of the chamber floor and looked up at the 12 elders. She said the Viharn word for father. She turned her head and pointed her snout at Darrow. She said it again. Then her 5 siblings, one by one, said the same word and pointed the same way. The chamber held its breath. The eldest of the council closed his eyes. He sat that way for a long time. When he opened them again, his voice was different. Not softer, but older. The voice of someone who had lived long enough to know when he had been wrong. "Call the vote," he said. The council voted that afternoon. The law that had governed clutch lineage for 900 years was amended. Darrow and his 6 dragons were recognized as a sovereign family unit, protected under both Viharn and human jurisdiction. No government in any sector would be permitted to act against them. The bounties were lifted. The disposal order was struck from the record. It did not feel like a victory when it happened. It felt quieter than that. The eldest came down from his high seat and walked to Darrow and placed one long claw, very gently, on Darrow's shoulder. "You will bring them to visit," he said, "sometimes." "Sometimes," Darrow agreed. They went home. The old mining station looked smaller when the Viharn transport set them down at the lower bay. Darrow walked through the halls and ran his hand along the walls and felt like he was seeing the place for the first time. The dragons spread out. Sable went to check the heating vents. Pip ran for the mess hall. Rook went to inspect the docking bay. Myra found her old cushion and lay down on it. Tully opened a book. Bean stayed at Darrow's side, her crooked wing brushing his hip. He sat down on the cold metal floor of the main room, Bean curled up beside him. He stayed that way for a long time. Years later, traders along the outer belt told the story to anyone who would listen. They told it in many ways. Some told it like a hero's tale. Some told it like a warning. Some told it like a joke. But they all ended the same way. They all ended with a human who had been told the cargo was cursed and who had carried it home anyway. They all ended with 6 dragons who had been told they were not worthy, and who had learned, on a forgotten station with a man who fed them paste and patched their toys, that they were. The galaxy stopped being afraid of the abandoned dragons after a while. It learned to be afraid of what they would do for the small, stubborn human who had called them family first.